All right, the purpose of this screencast is to read about the Civil War. This is a chapter summary, and it's in the History Alive textbook, which is called History Alive, the United States, and it's by the author Diane Hart. So you need that source information. Looking for images here. The painting End of the Rebellion in the United States, 1865, celebrates the conclusion of the Civil War and the preservation of the Union. You can see some key things here. Here's the Union's been preserved. You also have an African American standing before the Union, probably because they were liberated at the conclusion of the war, meaning African American slaves were freed. All right, chapter summary, the Civil War. In this chapter, you read about the Civil War between the Union, that's the North, and the Confederacy, that is the South. You used an annotated illustration of the soldier's haversack to help you understand the events and effects of the Civil War. You did not do this. Both sides had advantages and disadvantages going into the war. The North had a larger population and more factories and railroads than the South, but it lacked strong military leadership. The South had serious economic problems, but it had capable generals and the advantage of fighting a defensive war. So the North had some advantages, the South had some advantages, and you probably want to take a note on these advantages for the North and South. And just to help you out, in this map, the green states are the North, so they were all fighting for the Union, and then these blue states were the Confederacy or the South. So they were fighting to stay a separate country at the time. And the northern states were fighting to get the country back so it would be unified. That's why they called themselves the Union. New weapons and military tactics allowed soldiers to kill from greater distances. They also caused horrifying numbers of deaths and casualties. Unfortunately, medical knowledge was not as advanced as the weapons of war. Infection and disease spread rapidly through field hospital tents. More soldiers died of diseases than wounds by a ratio of 3 to 1. So there were advancements in weapons, but this led to a lot of casualties, but medicine and treatment wasn't as advanced, so a lot of people died as a result of this war. After the Battle of Antietam, President Lincoln decided to issue his Emancipation Proclamation, freeing all enslaved people in the Confederacy. The proclamation helped to make the war a fight to end slavery. So really, the Civil War was a fight to end slavery, and in the middle of the Civil War, President Lincoln makes the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing all enslaved people. As the war dragged on, both the Union, the North, and the Confederacy, the South, had to pass draft laws to gather more troops. So meaning they sent out mailings saying your son, it was always men, had to fight. Everyone wanted the war to be over. The defeat of Lee at Gettysburg ended the South's last attempt to invade the North. It proved to be a turning point. And so at Gettysburg, which is in Pennsylvania, Lee and his army, he was the Confederate general, went into the North, and they were defeated by the Union or the North. So Lee and the South retreated back south. That was the last time they would fight in the North. And it's seen as the turning point of the war because the war went pretty badly for the South after that. President Lincoln finally found the leader he'd been looking for in General Grant. Grant began waging total war on the Confederacy. Union soldiers marched through the South, burning fields and houses and terrifying all those in their path. So Lincoln puts Grant in charge and he attacks the South and really takes over and destroys a lot of towns in the South. When the Union Army surrounded Confederate troops at Appomattox Courthouse, General Lee was forced to surrender. Grant was generous to the Southern troops. He fed them and sent them home to rebuild their lives. The rebellion had ended. The time had come to rebuild. In the next chapter, you will read about how the country tried to become whole again. So one key thing to remember, before the Civil War, the country was divided between North in green and the South in blue. and the South had seceded or separated from the North and tried to become its own country, and the North fought in order to keep them all together. And during this process, the enslaved people were freed. So African Americans were freed. That ends the reading.